Hey, you guys, Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Let's get down and let's get jiggy with it. You ready? Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Now, you know what we're in. We're in a little series here about Ecclesiastes, the theme of which is meaningless. meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. That's Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 2. Sounds like something you want to just pick up and read, doesn't it? I mean, come on. That's the theme of the book. That's not the conclusion of the book. The theme of the book says you're not going to figure life out in the here and now. You're just not going to come up with any answers. And he's a little bit peeved with God when he gets over into chapter 3 because God has given us the ability to look past life and ask questions about stuff. I mean, who doesn't have questions about things? We've all got questions about things. He's given us the ability to do that and think through all that, but he's not given us the wherewithal to figure anything out. And so he's upset with all of that, but at the same time, his conclusion is life's going to be okay as long as God's in the middle of it, right? We got that all the way through. We know that. So in the course of his book, he's talking about all kinds of things. He's talking about relationships, and he talks about retirement. He talks about jobs where we spend a whole big portion of our lives is in working, earning a living for our families and all of that. He talks about death and dying, and he talks about stuff, and he talks about our relationship with stuff. I'm talking about our possessions and our junk and all that other kind of stuff that we seem to accumulate and have and all that sort of thing. So that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. So I want you to go to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Verse 10 is at the heart of it, but we're going to be looking at several things there, okay? And before we look at exactly what Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10 says in our time of study together, let me lay a little groundwork for all of that. You guys into groundwork? Everybody okay with groundwork? Yeah, well, we're going to do it anyway, so here you are. I want you to think about a fellow named Scott Lewis. You don't know him. I don't know him, actually. I couldn't pick him out of a crowd of one. I don't know who he is. I only know about him because of a conversation he had with a fellow named Bill Bright. You may have heard of Bill Bright. Anybody know who Bill Bright is? He's the founder of Campus Crusades for Christ. Comes from the Baptist line of tribes in American Christianity. And have done, over the years, tremendous things to spread the message of Jesus among particularly younger demographics. And so, done a lot of things. So Scott, who's really into that, is attending a conference where Bill Bright is speaking. And Bill said a challenge. He issued a challenge in this conversation. And the challenge was, give $1 million to help fulfill the Great Commission. Most of us in this room know what the Great Commission is, right? That's our marching orders. That's what we're all about. As Jesus says in Matthew 28, go into all the world, teach the gospel, baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teach them to observe everything that I've commanded you, and I'm going to be with you every step of the way. That's really Jesus' way of saying what our vision is, right? We gather to be transformed by the Spirit. And then as a result of that, we're building bridges to our community, whether it's a bunch of people or one person or whatever it might be, so that we might make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. So Bill Bright is there, and he challenges all of them, give $1 million to fulfilling the Great Commission. Now, here's the thing. This was not a call for a one-time contribution. All right? Hey, let's all get together, and we'll have a one-time $1 million contribution, and man, it's going to make history. That's not what he was saying. Let me tell you what he was doing. He was challenging everybody there to give personally $1 million to the Great Commission, to strategically come up with a plan whereby through the rest of your life you might give something according, like $1 million. Now, let me ask you something here just real quickly. Let's pause for a minute because I can see the look on some of y'all's faces. Some of y'all are thinking, say, what? Aren't you? I'm feeling kind of naked up here. Let me see your hand if you're... nobody's going to admit that, right? But it sounds kind of like, what, are you kidding me? Maybe he got all wrapped up in his stuff and, all that kind of stuff. And it sounds pretty passionate and exciting and all that. But really? Are you going to do that? And Scott Lewis is sitting out there in the audience, and that's exactly the reaction that he has. When I first looked at the story, that's exactly the reaction I had. I thought, come on, get in the real world, Bill. What are you talking about? So that was the reaction Scott had. And the more he thought about it, the angrier he got that the guy would get up and say something like that to a crowd of people. He felt like he'd been taken advantage of, kind of like maybe you would too if I got it. By the way, I'm not talking about giving this morning. It kind of looks like it, doesn't it? We're laying groundwork to something else. It impacts giving, but we're laying groundwork to something else. So he decides, I'm going to seek Bill Bright out, and I'm going to find out exactly what's he talking about. So he gets him in a conversation, and he says, I'm having trouble understanding that. Bill just cuts right to the chase. And he says, tell me something, Scott. How much money did you give to church last year? And Scott says, I gave $17,000. He paused for a minute, and then he said, that's 35% of my annual income. Scott was not a rich guy. He's like all of us. He was an entrepreneurial kind of guy, and he had a little machine shop business, and it made less than $50,000 the year before. Less than $50,000, somewhere in the $48,000 to $49,000 range. He gave $17,000 of it to church. Cal, y'all, he's a big giver, right? Particularly when you think about average for American Christians across the nation is about 2.5%. I mean, some people give a whole lot more than that. A lot of people, a whole lot less than that. So that's what the deal was. $17,000. Bill didn't skip a beat. Bill said, why don't you make up your mind, come up with a plan, and this year you give $50,000 to the church. And it just made Scott Lewis angrier. He said, this guy just absolutely doesn't get it. I might as well talk to a wall. That's more money than I made last year. And he goes home and he's all groused. What was it? He goes home and he talks to his wife and she says, how was it? And he said, well, that guy got up and said he challenged everybody to give, as individuals, $1 million, come up with some sort of plan. He said it was just the most disgusting thing he'd ever seen. Just really took advantage of the people and all that sort of stuff. And she said, well, maybe we ought to think about that. What will we do? So they prayed about it. They talked about it. They made a commitment that they were going to give $50,000 that year to God. Didn't know if they would or not. Didn't know if they could or not. Didn't know how that was all going to work out. But they said, we'll do that. We'll kind of have a plan. Here's our strategy to do that. And if God blesses it, God blesses it. I'm sure it doesn't always work out this way, y'all. But that year they wound up giving $50,000 primarily because of a job that closed on December 31st. Money coming in, they were able to give $50,000 that year. They passed their $1 million mark back in 2001, something like that. Now listen, y'all. I'm not here to talk about giving. But I'll tell you what, that is a testimony to what trust in God can do, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. See, here's my thing that I think about. Paul says something in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 7 that I wonder about. Here's what he says. He says, even as you have shown diligence, as you've been excelled in everything, whether it's in learning or in earnestness or in love for us, whatever it might be, he says, I want you to also do this. I want you to excel in the grace of giving. See that phrase, the grace of giving. That's God's gift to us, is to give back. And we've talked about that a lot. Because the one who really is blessed when you give, that's us. The joy of it. Man, that's a beautiful, you know what? I think that kind of joy that comes from that surpasses any other kind of joy you can even think, that you can even imagine. And folks that really get into that really understand God's grace, right? Excel in the grace or the gift of giving. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean just keep giving and giving and giving? Is that what that means? Well, I think when you look at Ecclesiastes chapter 8, you know what he's saying? It's a challenge to the Corinthian Christians, but by virtue, it's a challenge to you and I as well. It's a challenge to come up with to give strategically, to come up with a plan, and you work that plan, and you be challenged by that plan, and you excel. Like we want to excel in vocation, we want to excel in business, we want to excel in our hobbies. He says, look, I want you to excel in this business of generosity. Now, y'all stay with me here just for a second. Some people think, well, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you know what? You give money. It's not just about money. It's about time, and it's about energy, and it's about service. And you know what? You're absolutely right. It's absolutely right. It's about all those things. But here's the thing about 2 Corinthians 8. He's not talking about that other stuff. He's talking, by application he is, but he's talking about money, y'all. And that's the most personal thing about me outside of my relationship with my wife, my family, and my God, is my relationship with my stuff. And that's exactly what he's talking about. And do you know that he just got through spending 5 verses talking about a church in Macedonia? Now, you know about these guys because we've talked about them before. These people in Macedonia, 2 Corinthians 8, starting in verse 1. Listen, if you were on a walking tour of ancient Greece, you would have never given the Macedonian church a second look. Because you know what they were? They were church mice. They were poorer than church mice. In fact, Paul says they were in extreme poverty. In fact, so much so, if you look at those first 5 verses of 2 Corinthians 8, they were so much so that Paul said, I wouldn't even expect it. This is Mark's Revised Translation, okay? But he said, we weren't even expecting anything from those guys. I mean, but they did what we did not expect. They gave their hearts, and then he says, they begged for the opportunity. And this wasn't to the Great Commission. This was to give to people that were hungry and people that were homeless over in Jerusalem. That's what that collection was all about. So they said, no. We want an opportunity to be a part of that. Boy, there's something about that you got to love. And we want an opportunity to be a part of that. And he says they gave not only what they could give, he says, and here's the thing that we've talked about before, he says they gave beyond their ability. Now, what does that mean? And, we've talked about that too, you guys, right? I think it's something like you give beyond the ability to where the numbers maybe don't add up exactly. Kind of like what Scott Lewis did. Don't see exactly how that's good. Some of you don't believe me. You think I'm talking about giving this morning, don't you? Yeah? I'm not, really. We're laying the foundation to talk about something in Ecclesiastes 5. But we got to go through all of this, right? So he's saying, it's not about, so, what is that all about? I was in a conversation with the elders here a few weeks ago, and Dave was sitting, oh, there he is. Dave Reynolds said something, and Dave, how many, do you guys know Dave pretty well? Dave will say things that don't make any sense. I'm just saying. And sometimes he says things, and the first time I'm hearing it is the first time he's hearing it. Right? Because he thinks out loud. Tracy's going, I know that's exactly right. Yeah. He does. And I don't remember what we were talking about. We weren't even talking about, maybe we were talking about generosity. I can't remember in the meeting. But he said, you know what I like to do? He said, what I want to do when I get ready to decide what I'm going to give, he said, I want to put a number out there that's fuzzy. That's not exactly what he said, but that's kind of what he said. A number out there that's fuzzy in the sense that I don't know that we can really make that or not, but we're going to see. He says, otherwise, it doesn't seem like it's really a sacrifice to me. Boy, I love to hear from my elders that are saying things like that. That challenges me. Right? And isn't that exactly what 2 Corinthians chapter 8 is really all about? Now, let me tell you what popped into my head that night when he said that. And it's not the first time this question popped in. Okay? It popped in about 20 years ago. Maybe not quite that long. 15 years ago. A question popped into my head. And I was looking at me personally, because it's all about us individually and personally, right? Am I greedy? I don't even like to think that. Maybe am I greedy? And I came to the conclusion that probably to some degree I am. And I'm not saying you are. I'm not. But I am asking you to ask yourself that question. Am I greedy? I've heard people over the years of ministry confess a lot of things to me. I've never heard anybody confess to being greedy. Because it's kind of ugly, nasty some kind of way. We don't want to. But I tell you what I think. I think that I am, and I don't think that I realize maybe how much I am because of the wealth that I live in. Now, the first thing you got to figure out is what is greed? And I always thought, my thought had been up until about 15, 16, 18 years ago, that greed was something that people had more than I did struggle with. You know what I'm saying? They had more than I do, and they're not really, they ought to be, whatever. That's what greed, I was not even a candidate for greed because I didn't have enough. You know what? Here's the thing. Greed is related to your stuff, but it's not about the amount of stuff. See? It's about making decisions about what you're going to do with either that 10 cent, that dime that you have, or that $1 million. Right? That's what it's about. It's related to stuff. It's about stuff. So what is a definition of greed? And so try this on just for a second. Try this on. Greed is loving stuff. What do you think? Anybody want to argue with that? I mean, what do you... See, that's not very motivating. I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, you can hear that and think about that and just kind of going about your business, right? And besides that, there's a lot of things that I love. Maybe that's the wrong word. A good Shimano Chronarch reel, 7.0 to 1 ratio, gear ratio, loaded up with 14-pound monofilament line sitting on the end of a 7-foot medium rod with a fast taper and fast tip. On the end of it, a number 3 Gamakatsu hook. And on that hook, a Zoom pepper and chartreuse plastic worm, and I love that, y'all. You know what else I love? I love books. I love books. And here's what I do sometimes with books. I buy books that I know I don't have time to read. Does that make any sense to y'all? But I'll buy them. Why do I do that? Maybe because it's impressive to walk into Mark's office and see all those books. I'm being kind of, I'm being kind of what with you. It's not really my best feature. But maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. And you know what else I love? I love the approval of people. And I probably go after that too much. I don't know, can you take this kind of transparency on the part of your preacher? Because I'm not kidding you. I mean, that's where. But yet at the same time, it's still the love of stuff. Is somewhere, but that's not quite enough. So let's add to the definition. It's loving stuff more than you love people. How's that fit? Is that great? More than you love people or more than you love God? Jesus says a pretty strong thing in Luke chapter 12. He tells the story of the rich fool. You know that story, the guy that retired early because he could, and he built bigger barns and all that. You know why I told that story? Because there was somebody out in the audience. Jesus is going around preaching kingdom stuff, and there was somebody out there in the audience that said, "Hey, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." People get really hinky when it comes to their goods. Have you noticed that? Sometimes even family ties don't really matter all that much. Do you hear what I'm talking about? Because it's right here. I mean, maybe it's in your bank, but it's really in your heart, right? So we get, tell my brother to share the inheritance. And Jesus says, man, what in the world are you talking about? But he says, who made me a judge over you? But he said, let me tell you this. Verse 15, beware, he said. We've talked about that. Beware. Be on your guard against every form of greed. Now that tells me that greed sneaks up on you and you don't even realize it. That's what that tells me. And it doesn't just come at you one kind of way. It comes at you, and it comes at you, and it comes at you, and it comes at you. And when we live in a country where we got so much we don't even know what to do with it, I mean, wow, it just comes at you. Comes at you. Taylor and I were talking the other day, and we got to talking about how irritated we get when the internet is slow. It really frosts me. Okay, I need some help up here. How many of you get irritated when your internet? Yeah, buddy. You know what that is? That's a rich people's problem. That's a rich people's problem. He heard Rick Ashley say that one time, and I thought, wow, man, that's exactly right. How many things? Waiting in an airport, delays in the airport. That's a rich people's problem. Dropped calls. I had one yesterday talking to a guy in Arizona. It was an important phone call, and it just drops. It just... Rich people problem. Hey, you guys. What are we talking about here? What are we really talking about here? So Jesus says, he says, look, you be aware against every form, because it creeps up on you. You think, wealth is relative, and it just kind of comes all over you, and there you are. Watch out. He says, look, because human life is not defined by what you have. Do you see that in verse 15? Nobody ever said that before. Solomon came pretty close in the book of Ecclesiastes, as we're going to see in just a minute, because I'm not talking about giving, right? You understand? We've already shifted, right, from the giving thing. That was sort of our groundwork. But here he goes. He says right here, even if you have a lot. In other words, what that means is nobody's life is measured or is considered worthy because of what you have. Now, I know, but we don't believe that, really. That's not, our culture's not based on that. The social circles you run in and all that other sort of thing, it depends on what you have, doesn't it? It's been a while since I've been invited to the White House. How about y'all? Depends on what you have. But he says, no, not even if you have a lot. It's not about what you have. So, what is it about? What is greed? Let me give you a fuller definition, guys. See what you think about this. It's self-indulgence in the face of human need, whether it's need for the gospel or it's need for a can of beans. It's self-indulgence in the face of human need because greed has deceived you into thinking that you're not really greedy, but you don't really have enough to demonstrate that you care. And you can't care about anybody and everybody. You can't care about everybody, can you? But you can care about, I can care about who's right smack dab in front of me. Self-indulgence in the face of human need. When it's somebody that I could help, but greed has convinced me that I'm not greedy, but I just don't have enough to really care. What do you do with that? Deception, and that's huge, you guys. How do you handle that? Okay? What do you do? Solomon tells us, he says, here's the truth about stuff. Again, greed's related to stuff, right? No way getting around that. He says the truth about stuff, and then he talks about a cure. So let's look real quick, because I got sort of carried away there. So we're going to go through this quick. You get Ecclesiastes 5? Here's what he says. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Is that right? Whoever loves money never has money enough. Who is he to say that to us? Well, he's the richest man the world had ever seen, according to chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes. Up until that time, he had more gold and more silver and more herds and flocks and slaves and vineyards and houses, and he had all this stuff. And the reason he did that, he talks about that, is because he was trying to see, is there any meaning to life because of stuff? And he makes this conclusion still in chapter 2. He says, no. I had all of that more than anybody else, and it still is a meaningless existence, just life under the sun, just looking at life as it is. So when he says whoever loves money never has money enough, is he talking about himself? Sure. But he's also talking about you and me. Whoever loves money never has money enough. And the operative word there is loves and never, right? It's not money. Money's not the problem. Whoever loves money never has enough. He says the same thing in the second part of verse 10. He says it another way. That's called Hebrew parallelism. He says, whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. There it is. Two key words, love and never, and they're repeated in this verse. Love is twice, never is twice. You love it, but you never have it. You know what he's describing? Now look, he's not just talking about that wealth is deceptive, that stuff is deceptive. I've experienced that. So have you, right? In the Old Testament and New Testament alike, they all talk about how deceptive stuff is. But he's not talking about deception. He's talking about a subjective something that's happening down in your soul as we interact with our stuff. He's talking about addiction. Love and never. See that? Love and never. Do you know what an addiction is? It's a pathological pursuit of reward. But you never get all of it. You never get all that you want. See, that's addiction. Whether you're talking about drugs, or you're talking about sex, or you're talking about approval of others, or you're talking about money. You love it. That's an addiction. And do you know what, according to the ASAM, the American Society of Addictive Medicine, the number 4th characteristic of the top 5 characteristics of addiction is you lose your ability to objectively evaluate your behavior. Somebody that never has enough, they're always wanting more. Somebody has lost touch. Maybe all of America has lost touch. Yeah. He's talking about addiction. Now look, you guys. Do you know what addiction does? It kills you. From the inside out. Addictions kill you. Whatever it is, it kills you. That's why he said at the end of verse 10, this is meaningless. Meaningless because you never get it never gets there. Addictions kill. Back in 2005, a fellow named Michael Barron, he's a research guy, wildlife research guy. He was traipsing through Florida Everglade National Park. And that's a park where you got to watch where you step. You know what I'm telling you? Because there's things there that can eat you whole. Right? So he's walking through there, and he comes upon this site. It takes him a few minutes to piece together what had happened. There were 2 dead animals there. The first one was a Burmese python, 13 feet long. Deader than a doornail. And sticking out of his midsection was a 6-foot alligator. Are you getting the picture here? They had a tete-a-tete out there in the Florida Everglades. The python won and ate a 6-foot alligator whole. And it burst him from the inside out. His head, I saw the picture. I'm not going to show it you here because it's kind of gross. but his head and his torso and his front legs are up in the python's stomach, and his hindquarters are sticking out. There's guts and junk all over the place. Now, you know what that's a picture of? Appetite. Appetite gone to seed. Never having enough. I want you to get, however you visualize that in your mind, here's the word I want you to stamp across that. Addiction. And then I want you to take that image, addiction, and stamp it right over Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 10. There it is. We see it, but we don't see it. We see it, but we don't. I am living proof to you that I have too much to know how much I have. I'm like a little kitten drowning in oceans of cream, you guys. And I'm not saying that to make a point. I'm telling you because that's me. I know my heart. Do you know your heart? Do you know your heart? It's kind of like, anybody like Twilight Zone in here? Let me see. I love that. That's the best thing about Labor Day. So it's Twilight Zone reruns. Well, there's other things about Labor Day that I don't really love, but here you are. And so, episode 41, or if you want to go by season 2, episode number 5, it's called The Howling Man. Does that ring a bell with anybody? The Howling Man? It's about no? Boy, you guys are just newbies. Here it is. It's about an American walking through, he's on a walking tour of Central Europe, and he gets caught in a storm, a raging storm. And it's in the middle of the night. He's caught his death of cold. He's got pneumonia. It's just, he's going up here, and he stumbles on a medieval-looking castle, which really turns out to be a monastery for a bunch of reclusive monks who are really reluctant to let him in the front door. But when he collapses in a fevered semi-consciousness, they said, oh, well, we've got to do something with him. So they pull him in, and they decide they're going to nurse him back to health. Well, while he's in there, he hears this sound. He hears this, coming from somewhere inside the castle. How many of you have seen the episode? Okay. Here's this howling. And he goes to Brother Jerome, who's the head monk, and he says, what is that? He says, it's nothing. Never mind. You don't even worry. Well, that was just like, saying sick 'em to a dog. He just couldn't let it go. So he decided he had to go find out for himself. And he goes back and he finds a cell with a man behind the cell. And the lock is a little antique staff. Antique staff, a little bitty one. And that's what's holding the doors closed. And the guy says, you got to let me out of here. You got to let me out of here. Brother Jerome is insane. He is mad out of his mind. You got to let me out of here because I can't. And the guy says, well, why don't you just walk out? All you got is this little. He says, no, it doesn't work that way. You don't understand. I don't have time to explain. But you got to let me out of here. You got to let me out of here. You got to do it quick. And because Jerome is nuts, he's absolutely nuts. Well, he kind of said enough to sort of begin to bother the guy. So he leaves him in the cell and he goes back and he finds Brother Jerome. And Brother Jerome says, okay, all right, here's the truth. That's not a man. That is Satan, the father of lies. And that little staff is the staff of truth. It's the only barrier that he cannot get across. Now I realize that's kind of fanciful, right? But you see the imagery, don't you? Huh? Well, the American steps back and he says, guy's really nuts. I mean, this is crazy. So he goes back. Run the little clip here. He goes back. This is a clip from the finale. He goes back and he lets this guy out. Okay? Right here. He lets this guy out. He pulls that staff out. He lets him out. And the guy reaches down and paralyzes him. Just paralyzes him. And he begins to walk past him. And as he walks through the castle, he is transformed in front of your eyes from a man to Satan himself until he finally comes to the point where he vanishes in a boom, puff of smoke. Just like that. Now, continue to watch that. Here's what happens. Brother Jerome and the other guys come rushing up. And Jerome says to him, I'm so sorry for you, my son, because you got to live the rest of your life knowing what you turned loose on the world. And the guy's still laying on the ground. And he looks at Brother Jerome and he said, I had no idea. I did not know. He said, I did not recognize him. I did not recognize him. And here's the closing line of the episode. When he said, I did not recognize him, he said, that is man's weakness and Satan's strength. It's at the heart right here, right? We just don't see it. We just don't see it. Now, as you go through the rest of chapter 5, and I'm going to abbreviate this. We're going to look at the rest of chapter 5. It's pretty incredible. He talks about the instability of wealth. Let your eyes kind of drift down verses 11 and following. The instability of wealth, you can't really count on it. He says, I know, I've seen people that wealth has hurt them. What is that? I don't know exactly what that is, but you remember that lady a few years ago up in Chicago? She lived on cat food. She didn't have anybody, poor as anything, everybody thought. Ate cat food. When she died, they went in to clean up her house, and they found hundreds of thousands of dollars stuffed into every crook and cranny of that house. That's wealth that's done to the harm of somebody, right? I don't think anybody in here is that way, but I wonder as if it's a matter of degrees, kind of where are we along the line? He says it's unstable. Naked we've come into this world, and naked we're going to go. You can't take it with you. Come on, y'all. You can't take it with you. What are you going to do, he says in verse 11. Just look at it. That's what he says in verse 11. Just look at it. Gets down to verse 15. He says, you're not going to take it with you. And he says it's a grievous evil because you work so hard, but you can't do anything with it. Now, what's the cure to this blindness, this distraction? 2 ways to cure it, according to the book of Ecclesiastes. Here's the first one. You have to make God the center of your life. I don't mean just come to church on a Sunday. I mean, do that, yeah, but that's that. Every decision flows through Him. Every thought flows through Him. Every direction flows through Him. What is God asking me to do? It's not about what you want. It's not about what does God want. If He's boss, if He's Lord and Master, if He really died to give us life, we owe Him every single thing we have, right? So everything flows through Him. Make Him central. In fact, He'll begin to speak to you. If you look at verse 18, I believe it's verse 18 there in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. He said, when I begin to think about it, I begin to realize, you know what? Really, enjoyment in life is a gift of God. God's the only one that makes sense out of all of it. Read the last 3 verses of chapter 10 or chapter 5, and you'll come up with that. It's just you got to make God the center. Nothing happens until God is the center, because nothing makes sense unless God is the center. Center. If He's not the center, death is a horrible robber. Life is a waste. Because you can't take anything and everything you worked for, everything you sweated over, everything. It's, what is it? You're going to die, man. The only thing that makes sense is God Almighty. So, you put God at the center. Here's the second thing you do. You share it. Huh? Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 11 real quickly. Verses 1 and 2. And he talks about this all through his book, right? But we're just looking at this one a little bit. Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, and 8. You don't know what disaster may come upon the land. What translation? It says NIV. I don't think that's NIV, but anyway, it's okay. Cast your bread upon the waters. There's been a lot of dispute about what this verse is about, but let me tell you, from Jerome, actually from the Targum. Targum is a commentary on the Old Testament for covering centuries, right? The Jews interpreted this passage as meaning giving, sharing. Share what you have. Cast your bread upon the waters. Just get out and share it. Share it. Share it. To 7 people, to 8 people, whatever it might be, share. That's the only way we break the neck of this vice-like grip that's on us. What's this message about this morning? Own your stuff. You don't let your stuff own you. You'll be victimized and you will lose. It is an addiction that rots your heart, rots your mind, rots your soul, rots your kidneys. Kukaracha. Let's stand together as we pray. Father, we're grateful for your grace. We're grateful that life makes sense when we focus on you, and that's the only way it makes sense. We're so grateful, Father, for how you're the one that blesses us with enjoyment of life. We can't really enjoy it without you. We're victimized at every turn. We're subject to our own junk. So, Father, thank you for that, and help us to be people. We're not going to regret a single thing that you've blessed us with. Thank you for that goodness. You give us everything. What did Paul say, Father? You gave us these things for our enjoyment. Thank you for that. What a testimony it is to you that life can be fantastic. But you also said, not only in Ecclesiastes, Father, but in 1 Timothy, powerfully, share it, share it, share it. That, Father, you at the center, sharing it, that's what keeps us from being victimized by our stuff. We love you, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. And amen. Let's sing together, y'all.
I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. Take my heart, take my life as a living sacrifice. All my dreams, all my plans, Lord, I place them in your hands. I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. My life is not my own, to you I belong. I give myself to you. My life is not my own, to you I belong. I give myself to you. I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. Oh Lord, I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away, oh Lord. I give myself away so you can use me. Here I am. So here I am to worship. Here I am to bow down. Here I am to say that you're my God. And you're altogether lovely, and altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for our sake became poor. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God, and you're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. So here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God, and you're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me.